Well, before we start today's Wednesday walkabout, a little heads up. Some of you have asked in comments about my clothing, my boots, what I wear, my jewelry, or whatever. So I thought to answer those questions more easily, what I'm going to start doing is at the end of the videos, if I feel it appropriate, I'll make some kind of comment about source information for what I have on. That way, if you're not into that kind of stuff, you don't have to suffer through it. So if you are, just wait to the very end. There will be a little fashion epilogue. Well, today I'm going to do something kind of fun, and I'm going to go through my list of 7 superpowers of highly successful gardeners. And these are things that I have learned over time. And honestly, if I don't continually hone these superpowers myself, then I too am not a very successful gardener. So I'm going to go through them one by one. The most important at the beginning is consistency. Consistency in raising your children and in being a successful gardener is absolutely imperative. And what do I mean by that? Well, it's pretty obvious, but every single morning, rain or shine, I come out here and I look through the garden and I look to see if there are some things that need to be tended to that day. So I am consistently kind of making my list about things like weeding, watering, fertilizing, trimming, all of those kinds of things that I do consistently a little bit each day or every other day so that they don't add up to be one huge onerous task. So consistency is absolutely imperative. So today, as I was with my coffee cup and walking around, I have noticed that I'm really starting to get a problem with this clover that's coming up pretty much everywhere in the flower beds. It's been extremely wet, and so lots of bugs, lots of weeds are starting to flourish. So I'm going to get out my kettle and put some boiling water on all of this nasty clover, and I'm going to try to stay on top of it so it doesn't get worse later. So that's my number one tip: consistency. Well, my number 2 superpower cannot be overestimated, and that is curiosity. Really try to enhance your sense of curiosity because it will help you in so many ways. So here's an example. I've got this Veronica here, and I've got all sorts of mottling on these leaves. And so I'm going to be curious about what the cause is. Now, I think it's probably overwatering because this area isn't well draining and because we've had so much rain lately. But what can I do to kind of satisfy my curiosity? Well, I could take these leaves to a nursery and I could ask someone at the nursery what they think it is. I could take a snapshot of this and then I could Google it and see what are signs of overwatering and compare my leaf to the image that it shows on Google. And really, in general, I would encourage you anytime you need to ask a question in the garden that you don't know the answer to, try to satisfy your curiosity by asking another gardener who might be more successful or experienced than you. But by all means, use technology to your advantage. When I first started to garden, there was no such thing as being able to Google and get answers on the internet. Now there's just a wealth of information there, and all you have to do is just ask the right questions. For example, I would say, why are my leaves spotted, mottled, and curling? And I could probably come up with some answers that would then match the conditions in my own garden. Boy, did you hear that? Those were some rambunctious squirrels. So that would be my number 2 superpower, and that would be really try to foster a sense of curiosity. Well, number 3 in my superpower lists is to really try to nurture your capacity for delight, which kind of feeds into being curious. I think one of the most exciting things about gardening is just really reveling in nature and all of the things that you can learn and literally be delighted at. So if you find that you really need to work that capacity for delight muscle, then might I recommend you get out into nature with a little kid who will in short order really help you exercise that muscle. So I would really try to continue over time, even after you have gardened for years and years, to really nurture, foster, and enhance your capacity for delight. Well, yet another superpower that I continue to struggle with is common sense. Exercise some common sense. Now, you may notice that I have a back brace on, and really I am doing this for demonstration purposes because I told you not too long ago I really hurt my back, as I have done on numerous occasions before. Why? Because I did not recognize and practice common sense. I did not recognize my own limitations, and I really tried to do something that I wasn't physically strong enough to do because I was just too impatient. A number of years ago, my neighbor across the street got up on a ladder, and as soon as he got up on that ladder to prune his trees, he was in his 70s then, I remember thinking, that is so not a good idea. And I no sooner turned to turn off the faucet than I heard a crash. He had fallen. I ran across the street, and he had a triple compound fracture. And I ended up in the emergency room with him and calling his wife and everything else. So recognize your limitations and practice some common sense. Now, another example of common sense is if I plant something and it doesn't do well, I can move it. That's common sense. I can either dig it up and transplant it to another location, or in my case, very often, I'm embarrassed to say it took me so long to recognize this, that a pot can be moved. And I would have a beautiful container planting, and as it got hotter and hotter, it would begin to suffer and it wouldn't do as well. And finally one day I had an aha moment and thought, oh, I can move this pot out of the searing sun and into a more moderate location. So when you are struggling with a problem, then tap into that good old common sense God gave you and see if you can come up with a solution. Well, here's another superpower that I continue to work on, and I really think as gardeners and as garden designers, it's something that we never get perfect, but we continually work on. And the next superpower would be the art of composition. Learn how to compose pleasing arrangements in the garden. And you can start out with that wonderful magic of 3, 3 or 5 or 7 uneven numbers tend to be more appealing to the eye. They tend to be more memorable, and they also just can create an easy mechanism for us to create interesting sweeps across a space. I often refer to my favorite design rule, and that's repeating with something, the rhythm and repetition of a design element across a space. And in my garden, where you see all of the boxwood, that is really a perfect example of that. They're not all equally spaced. There are some that are more heavily pervasive in one area than in another area, but nevertheless, that one fixture, that one evergreen component is in rhythm and repetition throughout the entirety of the front yard. That creates harmony, it does create rhythm, and it's very pleasing to the eye, and it unites the landscape. So that is another superpower that you really want to work on, and that I am continually working on, and that's my eye for composition. And to that, I would kind of, I would also say, add add color to that. Color and composition, what colors work well together and in what combos. So there is yet another superpower for you guys to work on. Well, this is my last and maybe my final twin superpower, and that would be establishing a sense of community and always respecting context. So whether or not it's here on YouTube or it's on Instagram or it's people that just drive by my home, I really try to relate my garden passion to whatever that community is and share it with others. And likewise then, those people share their experience, their knowledge, and their passion for gardening with me. You guys do it all of the time, and I think it's one of the reasons that we have so much fun here. The other thing I think is that we should be mindful of and try to foster as we develop our gardens, and that is always being respectful of context. I've alluded to it before as what I consider to be good garden fit, and that is be mindful of your neighborhood, your climate, your resources, any kind of constraints that you might be having to work within, and remember the context of how and where you garden. Be respectful of others in that regard, and be respectful of yourself, because over time that context will change and you might need to be flexible and adapt with it. And let me tell you, adaptability and flexibility as you age and have to modify your gardens, that is the ultimate superpower, paying attention to the context in which we garden. You guys have a great weekend. Well, today's ensemble is brought to you by the fact that I had to shoot some stills for my book about proper stretching before you exercise and things of that nature. So that is why I'm not in my traditional gardening gear. If you're curious about what I have on, I've got Lululemon's leggings that were a gift from my kiddos a couple of Christmases ago. My sandals are from Forever 21, and I will put a link below to some similar form-fitting sandals that I love on Amazon and that are great for working in the garden. And my top was basically a thrift store find. I can't remember how much it was. So there you go. There's my ensemble for today. Oh, and my earrings were a Mother's Day gift from Hubs. There you go.